Okay, hi, everybody. Welcome to the bylaws work session. Are there any announcements from anyone? I see Sue.
I have one. Hang on one second. Sorry. I've got to do something. Make sure I have it. Okay. Kathy Colson Keegan, our dear crafter who passed last year, was a longtime member of the Veneta Park Board. I found out today that the Veneta Park Board is having a tree planting in Kathy's memory. This will be on Friday, April 28th at 3 p.m. It will be held at Fern Park, which is on 8th Street in Veneta. Everyone is welcome. Thank you.
What was the time on that again, Sue?
3 p.m. on Friday, April 28th.
Thank you. Are there any other announcements? Well then, let's get on with it. So the bylaws committee has been working for a long time, and we finally have something to share. The plan is to go through, just kind of explain the document and go through the changes. I'll talk us through them, and then we'll go through them again and have questions and comments that anyone wants to make. I recommend getting out a paper and pencil so that you can write down your notes, maybe as we go through the first brief run through, and then you'll be ready when we're ready to have questions and comments. Please raise your hand in the chat, and Arna's going to keep track of that for me and help call on people. Are there any beginning questions, or shall I go ahead and start with what I want to show? I'm going to share my screen. And the first thing I want to share is the site. And we have a document there about the bylaws amendment background, just kind of what we've been doing and how we've been doing it and what will happen next. And then the second document is the amendment recommendations that I am going to be sharing with you now. So let me switch. First, I want to kind of show you the structure of the bylaws. There's 11 articles in the bylaws. Name, office, mailing address, purpose, date of fair, fiscal year, members, membership meetings, board of directors, meetings of the board of directors, officers, transactions, and an amendment at the end. And so we'll go through these and I'll show you the changes. I'm going to stop sharing this one and go to the other one. And these are just recommendations that we are recommending to the board for changes in the bylaws. The structure of this document, the first column shows the current bylaws. The second column shows the proposed changes that we sent to the lawyer. The third column shows more changes after we got feedback from the lawyer. And then we have some notes that kind of explain why the changes were made. Occasionally there's notes, and then a proposed final draft if you want to see what it would look like after the changes. And so in Article 1, we thought it would be a good idea. I'm going to make this a little bigger. We thought it would be a good idea to make it a little bit easier to read and to change it from saying the corporation or the Oregon Country Fair to just say the OCF, meaning to refer to the corporation every time. And board will be hereinafter referred to as the board. Then we missed one and the lawyer caught it, where we would change that to OCF. in that Article 2. Otherwise, there's not any changes to Article 2. Where's the one about fair? Here it is. The Oregon Country Fair will hereinafter be called just the fair, and that's it, referring to the event. Article 3 was basically just making those changes. We don't have to say of directors every time. Article 4, that was the only change. We're talking about the corporation there. Article 5 is about members, and there's many sections to this one. We're recommending a change to 2 classes of membership because the lawyer keeps saying it's like we have 2. We're recommending a change in eligibility and admission. It's all somewhere else in the bylaws, and it confused things to have it there. Let me move this over to the notes. It addresses a comment in Article 5. The term elder wasn't defined, so we added that policy. And here's the lawyer comment that when we say general members, it implies that there's more than one class of members. One of the later recommendations is to separate out the secretary position to show what we've actually been doing. So these are not major changes to the membership responsibilities. We moved the charter members up above because of the comment that it's inconsistent, saying that we have only one class of members. And it's kind of funny because we all know what charter members are, but someone else reading this document doesn't necessarily know. We do have some wordsmiths on our committee, and so sometimes we just wanted to make it easier to read and more understandable. So you might notice some changes like that. We divided section number 4 here into dividends and earnings and dissolution, partly due to a lawyer comment, but not really a major change. We did add some language to tie in with ORS 65. So here's the part about charter members, which really isn't changing. Termination. There's automatic termination, and rather than voluntary termination, resignation sounds better, we think. And here, there was some confusion with expulsion, and we thought maybe that doesn't need to be there. And since suspension is less serious than termination, we put that first. But otherwise, again, not a major change. This was deleted because it says pretty much the same thing as the next sentence. And the list there was not needed. So the recommendation is to leave it out. Rights of membership doesn't have any substantial change, just some capitals that we thought should be in there. This one we moved the sentence to the beginning, but otherwise no change. This one is about board actions. And again, just trying to make it more clear and add which secretary. Article 6 is membership meetings. We don't have to say of directors every time. Special meetings, this was revised to comply with one of the ORS. There was some confusion in this one with whether the recording secretary should call all the meetings or not. We decided this one should be called by the membership secretary. No major changes to notice. Or quorum. The only change in voting is revised to comply with an ORS. You'll find affirmative vote of a majority of votes comes up again later. Regarding membership lists, and this is about sending to, if a member wants to communicate with other members. And it's just a small change because it looked like there was going to be more than one notice the way it was worded. We thought estimated made more sense than actual anticipated. No major changes to absentee ballots. We call them absentee ballots, but in the ORS, they call them proxies. Again, changing it to membership secretary. Making it clear this was about membership meetings. Since we do not have an operations board, we thought we should take out the appointing coordinators. And again, there's some wordsmithing here. So we're in the board of directors section. Qualifications, just some wording changes. Again, we don't need to say of directors every time. So not a lot of changes in this one. Here's another one of the affirmative votes. And again, not any substantial changes, another affirmative vote down there. Vacancies. Again, taking out coordinators as that's not a board job anymore. No major changes there. Just sort of finessing it. Meetings of the board. In Article 8. Special meetings, these are special board meetings. As provided in section 4 of this article, which needed to comply with an ORS here. And this was language suggested by the lawyer here. This used to be on-site meetings, and we think that this is a throwback to when it was a operations board, when most of the board members were coordinators and thought that they would need a meeting during fair time. And we felt that emergency meetings might be needed. We're not sure what the emergency might be. I don't know what it could be, maybe a fire or something like that. And the lawyer gave us some of this language here, which is more specific than with as much dispatch as is reasonably possible. This isn't something we think will happen often, but felt that it was probably a good idea to leave it in there. All we changed here was to capitalize directors, another affirmative vote. Leaving out this conflict of interest because there's a separate section that covers it. Officers. Minor changes until we get to the recording and membership secretaries. We weren't going to put this in at first in the event that one of the secretary positions is not filled, but given current circumstances, we decided we probably should. And it sort of divides out the responsibilities of the recording secretary and of the membership secretary. We added the date for the special meetings so that that's the membership secretary's job instead of the recording secretary. No major changes to treasurer. Minor changes to the president. Adding that in was recommended by the lawyer for vice president. Change discussed to considered on lawyer recommendation because it made it sound like the board wouldn't be voting on it. Again, unnecessary language, especially if it's up here. Transactions. This Article 10 has a few changes. Revised to track ORS regarding director conflicts, which is framed in terms of transactions rather than contracts. So these were recommendations by the lawyer. You can see that our changes were more wordy, just wordsmithing. Again, revised to better track the ORS. This is taken out because it's covered later on. Down here in C, a person who's related to the director or officer. Which officers were added because they were in our existing bylaws, but they're not in the statute. And the relevant language from this one was moved up to section 1 up here. And Article 11 is the amendment. And again, it was revised to comply with one of the ORS. And there's another affirmative vote added. So I went through that kind of fast. And now we'll go back and go through them more slowly. Article by article. Let me move this box so I can get up there faster. So let's just take it article by article. Are there any questions or comments about the change to OCF and the board? Arna, tell me if anybody is in the chat.
Yeah, Heidi, I'll tell you if there's anyone with their hand up.
Okay, jump in there. Any comments or questions about the purpose? Really not any basic changes there. Date of the fair.
Okay. AJ has his hand up.
AJ.
Yeah, I'm curious about what problem was being solved by changing the simple, like when you say wordsmithing, like the name, for example, the abbreviation, like where did that come from? Changing that
I can feel that.
Thank you.
Okay, the current iteration of the bylaws uses the term Oregon Country Fair to mean two distinct things. Article 1 uses Oregon Country Fair to mean the corporation. Article 2 uses Oregon Country Fair to mean the fair. So in order to disambiguate that term and have it have consistent terms, we elected to call, rather than use the word corporation over and over and over, which is just horrible, we decided to use OCF for the corporation and fair for the event. It's a simple matter of disambiguation.
I think when you look at the final, how it would look at the end, it makes it read more smoothly and it clarifies the difference. Thanks, AJ. Was there anybody else?
Nope.
Okay. Date of the fair. I hope nobody has any questions about that since there's not much of a change. Fiscal year. This might have some discussion on membership. I know that one comment came from John Silvermoon about perhaps defining charter members a little bit more. Like I said before, we all know what they are. But some,
I was going to jump back for a moment to Article 4, just as an illustration of how the OCF fair distinction works. The old language said fiscal year of the fair. Well, the fair is the event. The event doesn't have a fiscal year. The organization does. So by using OCF versus fair consistently, we consistently clarify what we mean when we say Oregon Country Fair.
thank you.
I got a couple of hands. Lisa?
Yeah, I volunteered to read comments on behalf of John, who couldn't be here, and he did have a comment on this section under membership. He says, if we are going to recognize two classes of membership, I think there needs to be a clearer definition of what it means to be a charter member, including eligibility requirements, rights and responsibilities, and method to rescind membership if there is one. It should also be made clear that whenever the phrase membership is used in various clauses, if that refers to both classes or only one. If we are going to recognize two classes, I think we should go slow in doing so. If total members are entitled to repayment of upon dissolution of the corporation, are the sum total of those notes liabilities, and should that be carried on our books? Does anyone know the total? And can charter membership also be terminated in accordance with Article 5, Section 5?
Was there another hand up, Arna?
Yes, AJ.
We went past it really fast. You went I believe there was a section about the dates.
Article 3?
Yes. What changed in there? Did you say something changed in there?
We just cut out Oregon Country and put fair rather than saying the Oregon Country Fair Annual Fair Event. We just said the fair.
Okay.
And
And
we
my
took out
question
of
around
director.
that, my question around that is that at any of those changes that you made there, because there are, I can see the reasoning around putting Oregon Country Fair each time, because there are a lot of fairs around. And at any point through this where you've changed that to fair, could someone be confused about that at all?
I can feel that. Article 2 defines the term the fair when it says the purpose of the corporation or of the OCF shall be to sponsor the Oregon Country Fair here and after the fair. It's parallel statutory construction when you say here and after and you define a term. That term means that for the rest of that document.
And also, these are the Oregon Country Fair bylaws. I don't think that they will be confused with any other fair. I could be wrong.
You're not.
You okay, AJ, with that?
Yeah, yeah, I can move past it. Yeah, I just don't, I'm having trouble. I mean, I would even rather it be OCF, just consistently. Because I just foresee an issue. I mean, if somebody tries to interpret these bylaws in a way, I think making it very clear whether we're talking about corporation or the event or whatever, that we're talking about the Oregon Country Fair. I don't see a problem that it's solving doing that. And I would love to hear, other than it's convenient or less words, I mean, I don't think that's a good enough reason right now. So that's where I'm at.
At the risk of repeating myself.
You don't have to repeat yourself. I heard.
Well,
you don't have to repeat yourself.
Okay, well, I'll try.
I have an understanding.
The terms are consistent. There are two distinct uses of the term Oregon Country Fair. One of them is always OCF, which is the corporation. The other one is always the fair, which is the event.
And like I said, this is just a recommendation. The board can choose not to do that.
Okay,
Are
moving
there,
on.
the last question, how many of the bylaws committee members are present here tonight?
I believe that all of us are here.
And have you guys elected a spokesman to answer everyone's question?
I was asked to present, and I'll answer questions as I can, and other committee members will also answer questions. LT has good knowledge of the bylaws from his many years of being on the bylaw committee, so he will answer a lot of them.
My recollection is that you and I, Heidi, were working in tandem, and that essentially you were the play-by-play and I was the color commentation.
Precisely. But we also have Palmer and Diane, Arna, and tell me if I'm forgetting somebody. Lisa. Thank you.
Me also.
And
And
Paxton.
Paxton. See, I forgot the board members, except for Arna, who's helping with the chat. Okay. Any
I got
other-
two more hands.
Okay, about membership.
Yeah, we're on the same thing here. Well, yes. Sandra?
Yeah, I can't see is my sound on?
Yeah,
I can hear you.
we can hear you.
Okay. So I thought you did a good job of distinguishing members and charter members here, but when I was reading down into the next section, the definition for the charter member seems to be hinging on the only on the payback potential of the promissory note. And other than that, I don't think there were any other real additional benefits to being a charter member. And I am not sure about that promissory note. I don't actually, I wonder if anybody's ever seen one. I haven't seen one. I asked Ron if he remembered sending those out, and he said he did not. So if that is not the case, then do we really need to distinguish charter members? You know, if it is, I thought you did a good job of it, but if it's hinging on that, I think that's maybe a little tenuous.
Thank you, Sandra.
Can I speak to that real quick?
Go ahead.
So the charter members already exist in the current bylaws. And the attorney pointed out to us that if we have members and charter members, that we do in fact have two classes of membership, whereas the current bylaws say that we have one class of membership. So, you know, we kind of had, the committee kind of had the same questions about, well, are there any promissory notes? What, you know, what does all this mean? And so what we did was we wrote language for if the board decides to keep charter members in, then this is the kind of language that we would need to have to be legal and consistent. We don't have to have charter members in there. And the committee isn't making a recommendation either way. It's the board's decision. But this is the language that we would need, or some very close iteration of this language, if the board chooses to continue having charter members in the bylaws.
Paxton.
I want to point out that I know of charter members still having booths in the fair. And so they remember real well. However, in my opinion, I think we ought to do away with charter members entirely. And I'm not sure exactly how to do it. I sat on a work group with Leslie back in the early mid-90s, 1990s, when we were trying to identify, because of this, who were charter members, who donated $300, who gave a loan, gave $300 as a loan, because both those were offered, and I do believe there are certificates out there. Nobody could find a list of either group from past records, and there was no idea really of who was owed money in the future, who not. This was 35 years ago or 25 years ago. So I think it's time to sit and actually look at honoring the charter members in a different way than keeping them in the bylaws. The only thing that I remember that they were offered in more modern times, and I'm not sure if that's the case, was that they got first choice of their booth, before anyone else. And that, I think, was the only thing that it was a residual, honor. Some people have certificates that hang them in their booth, and they really value those. So there are people that really, that helped start the fair, that gave the very first monies for the down payments and that. So I would love to just remove charter members and figure out some better way of honoring them in the fair. Thank you.
I think John Alexander's hand is up next.
John Alexander is up next.
Hey, thank you. I hate to go back, but I raised my hand during the conversation about the hereafter OCF hereafter fair. And I appreciate, first of all of you all for all the work that you did. Thank you so much. This is really clearly laid out. This is lovely. And I was just wondering whether, just to further clarify and possibly, I don't know if this would address what AJ was going for, I'm not quite sure, but if that one line that said the purpose of the OCF Corporation shall be to sponsor the Oregon Country Fair event, lowercase, here and after the fair, if that would just add that last little bit of clarification, because I did remember seeing it OCF, Oregon Country Fair being traded back and forth before. So I appreciate the attempt to do that and the attempt for brevity and clarity. So I don't know if just adding event in that sentence would be helpful or not. Just a thought.
I'll jump in to say the word event is in that sentence.
I just yelled out loud, no. And let me make sure I'm looking at the right thing. Okay.
Which
Yeah.
shall be an annual,
Event.
there you go. It's the sin of redundancy.
I will look at it again. I'm looking at something that I pulled from it. I'm going to shut up now.
Palmer.
My recollection, which is of course subject to a reality check, is that originally it was offered that you could be repaid if you wanted to for your charter membership, which I believe was $100 for an individual, and I believe $300 for a booth. The only thing that it ever could get you, and checking with Katie, recently retired booth reg coordinator, it used to be that after new booth claim day, no, excuse me, after old booth claim day and before new booth claim day, a charter member booth could choose a new spot. But according to Katie, that probably hasn't happened for a while. Love you, bye-bye.
Grumpy.
So, surprise, surprise, at some point in the past, I was given the task of holding the charter membership, the original charter membership copies of the charter members. At some point, and I think it was Norma, and she will, or somebody maybe on this Zoom, knows that I gave them the originals I gave back to somebody at the fair office. They may even be in the archives, which someone should check. And I have, I think, a Xerox copy of everything I gave back, or most of what I gave back. So there are charter members. The speculation as to what a charter member gets, what I will do, there's a sheet of paper that says what charter members get, as well as their what they gave and what they expect to get back, and a copy of their certificate, although the certificate copies didn't come out very well. At any rate, what I will do is I will scan them tomorrow, not all of them, but I will scan the substance of what a charter member really is when they became charter members, and send them to the office so that it can be distributed to whoever wants it, so people can do this with knowledge as to what a charter member actually is. That sound okay?
That sounds great, Grumpy. Thank you.
I had me on the list next, but I think Grumpy kind of got it all there, if we can send all that stuff in. I mean, I was living with Ron when he did that charter membership drive, and he doesn't remember doing loans, or promising money back. But if Grumpy's got the real information there, that's great. I do remember that Jill was insistent that there was only one class of membership. And that charter members were not a second class when she was, our attorney. She was really insistent on that. But moving on. No, I was the last one on the list here. So Heidi, the floor is yours.
Okay, I guess I just wanted to add that while I was membership secretary, Susie Prozansky gave me a list that was from a handwritten list that Robert Despain had of charter members. And so I have that list, and it doesn't it doesn't designate who loaned and who gave money, but there are stars by some of the names. We're not sure what the asterisk was for though on that list.
If it's possible, if it was a list from Ron, we might be able to figure it out. Although it's a long time ago, his memory is not that great anymore.
Well, and I don't have the handwritten list of a.
No, okay.
So I just have, it was put into like a spreadsheet.
Oh,
And some of the names were hard to read, and so we're not, it's like, I'm not sure that's who it really was. I think it was this person. But, you know, I'm glad that Grumpy maybe has some better historical records.
Right.
So any other, so no more comments about charter members?
I had one more.
Go ahead.
In just that the bylaw recommendation is pretty specific about a promissory note, and that's a legal document as far as I know. So anybody who's not in possession of a promissory note would not be eligible for repayment according to the bylaw. And there comes Grumpy. Okay, I'm waiting.
May I?
yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Sophie.
There are promissory notes. At least I have copies of promissory notes.
Okay.
Interesting.
Okay.
And basically, it's, I'll just basically tell you, it basically says that if the fair has money and the person wants the money back, they can ask for it. You know, and maybe it's all at dissolution. And I know, and I don't remember when, and I don't remember who, and maybe I have in my file someplace, someone did ask for the money back, and they had already gotten it back. They had just forgotten that they had gotten it back. And we're not talking about a lot of money. And then I think someone else asked for it back, and we decided to give it back. But we're talking 10 years or so ago.
Lisa,
Yeah, so the bylaws as charter members apply, you know, as the bylaws apply to charter members, it just refers to upon dissolution, after the fair pays off any other creditors, then the charter members that have promissory notes would get repaid.
I'm wondering if we can find, you know, get maybe language from the lawyer where we stick with one class of membership with just a little historical designation of, or explanation of charter members and how they have the same rights, duties, and liabilities. Maybe we should look to something like that.
or could we put, you know, just sort of forget the charter members, keep everything as one class of membership, but under dissolution, just say people with promissory notes will get paid upon dissolution? I mean, do we have to say they were charter members with promissory notes? I mean, couldn't we just, I mean, that's really what the issue is. We're talking about promissory notes that will come due on dissolution.
Right.
So can't we just say that and just kind of ignore the fact that it's charter members in terms of anything else? And then we could just have one class of members and get rid of this whole charter membership stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of goes along with what Paxton was saying about removing charter members from the bylaws, but still honoring them in some way. So maybe this is, you know, stuff that we can take back to committee and talk about and craft some language and run it by the lawyer and see what everybody thinks after that.
Yeah, that might be a better way to deal with it.
Can I just, I'm stopping sharing. Can I just get a thumbs up from board members if they want us to pursue that?
Can I jump in before we do? My hand seems to have
Sure.
disappeared.
I didn't see
Okay,
your hand.
I think we did discuss this in committee, and I believe that we pretty explicitly defined that there was no difference between the two classes of membership except pursuant to the promissory note. So I see two problems. One of them is the sort of contractual breach. Well, you know, forget about all that deal we gave you for getting your money back. And the other one is the dignitary offense, which is, you know, there's, as was pointed out, a lot of folks think, hey, I'm a charter member, you know. Many of you probably are charter members.
Mhm.
You know, it's only a matter of time before there are no more charter members.
Mhm.
And so the lawyer's right. We have two classes of membership. The effect of those two classes of membership is only what it is. It's nothing else. We don't get extra votes. You know, we don't get to go to the front of the food lines. We don't get any special deals, right? and sooner or later we'll all be gone. So I think that the language as proposed ought to be adequate, and we can just get rid of it later when the last charter member, rides off over the rainbow.
Grumpy?
I think you all should look at the documents, and then decide if you want to do anything. So I'll make sure you all, at least the office gets the documents so you can all get them in some way. Because they do say somewhat, or what I think what the bylaws say. I mean, I haven't gone over them in detail, and you guys can, and like the promissory note and the agreement, because there is a promissory note and an agreement and a certificate, at least for each charter member. And maybe it ends up just being a description of somebody who gave money, but you all can decide how you want to word it once you see what the documents actually are.
Okay, thank you. We did talk about that in committee too. Maybe we just call them something else or somehow change their name. So, okay, I won't make you do a thumbs up then. Are we ready to move on?
Yeah,
Okay.
my chat back up.
Any comments about this somewhat minor change to eligibility and admission, which is about membership? And this is not much of a change from the current bylaws. And here's the part about dividends, earnings, and dissolution, which is the only other place that it mentions charter members. Okay, termination of membership. Any questions or comments about the changes there? Basically changing termination to resignation. Taking expulsion out of the equation and just talking about suspension or termination. Arna, I figured out how to look at the chat box. And I'm not seeing any hands go
No,
up.
there's no hands. I haven't, no. I
So
wouldn't.
I'm gonna go ahead and move on to this one about members who are excluded from the property.
This is not a substantive change. It's just really cleans up some redundant language that doesn't need to be in there and just makes it more clear.
Precisely. Rights of membership. Information, again, no change except for the order. And regarding membership and board actions. I thought this was interesting because I'm not sure that we have ever really followed this exactly, where a member may present proposals and suggestions to the board and advocate their acceptance. I think we do that. But the piece about if a member wishes to be heard, they shall schedule the matter to be discussed.
Yeah, I don't remember ever doing that, but I think it's nice to have it in there.
Yeah. So Article 6, membership meetings. And special membership meetings.
Lisa.
Go
has
ahead. Or just, you could read them, Lisa.
Okay, I'll read it. This is John Silvermoon comment about membership meetings. Article 6, Section 2, special meetings is a little confusing. I think it would be better to separate into 2 sections. Special meetings called by the board and special meetings called by the membership. For the former, I assume the board sets the time and place, while for the latter, the membership secretary sets the time and place. It is not entirely clear from this article as written if that is indeed the case.
I can see how that could work. To have 2 sections, one's called by the board, and that could be called by the recording secretary. And one for the one's called because of a petition. And notice did not have any substantial changes. Sandra?
Yeah, I had a question on this. You know, I actually am not sure that they need to be separated because it's a special meeting. It's either called by the board or the membership can call it, but it's the same kind of meeting. And you know, I don't think we need to get too complicated on this. And the other thing I was interested in is, you know, one of the questions that I think we came up with during the recall or the removal petition was that our bylaws prevented us from being able to have a removal petition voted on during the elections. And then I heard later that we probably didn't get that right in saying that as long as it was on the agenda, it would meet the criteria for, I know that's later in this. But when I was rereading it in this section here, it just says business of any special meeting shall be limited to those matters set forth in the notice. So I'm not sure where to talk about that, either here or in that later piece. I think it had, I forget what section.
I think it's the section about removal of a director that specifies that it has to be a meeting called for that purpose.
Yeah, but would it be called for that purpose if it was on the agenda? It doesn't really say you have to have a separate meeting. So do you want to talk about that later? Or just pointing it out here and talk about it later? Or how do you want to do that?
I think I'd rather talk about when we get to the part about removal.
Okay. Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Okay. So quorum, voting, lists. Proxies. Anything else on Article 6? I don't see any hands going up, so I'm going to move on to Article 7. Which does not have, I mean, the changes here were to remove coordinators and fix the language a little bit.
I had a question on that. I did put my hand up there. Shall I go forward on there? Can we backtrack a little bit? It's under the board is authorized to, yeah, there we go. So my question on this one was creating committees, appointing committee members, entering into contracts. Now, the board can enter into contracts. You know, for example, I think we entered into a contract as the board to do some work with one of the consultants. But generally speaking, we don't enter into contracts. So is this clear enough to separate operations from board business? Did you guys discuss that?
Not that I recall. But I think that's a good question.
So,
Lawrence, were you wanting to speak to that?
I wasn't, though I thought of it as we were reading through this, and I think it's an important point. I would say in general, if the board wants to retain any power to enter into contracts, it needs to be there. I don't know. I think that would be a matter for the board, maybe in open session, maybe in closed session with the ED to talk about how you see that going forward. I raised my hand to say that I was confident we did not intend to misspell the word acquiring.
Right there.
You may see the problem, he punned.
I see it.
We'll see.
I can't change it on this one.
Acquiring has a C, doesn't it?
It does, but not here, it doesn't.
Okay,
Um,
in your notes, we need to fix
See what you're saying.
well, what is your opinion on the contracts in there, LT? How would we distinguish between contracts that the board would manage, you know, for the work of the board, and yet didn't leave it open to, slop over into the work of operations?
Well, I think the only thought I've got on that is, again, that if the board wants to retain any power to enter into any kind of contracts, it needs to be there, but that the actual day-to-day operation of contracts is something that well, I guess we have to start with an assumption of good faith on the part of the board, or the board and the ED need to sit down and talk about that if it should come up. But I think that there has to be some language in there, unless the board determines that the board doesn't want to engage in any kind of contractual activity and that it's all an operational thing. And I think the board has the power to do that one way or another. But that would be something I think that you all and Kirsten sit down and figure out. I don't know it's hard for me to think of what contracts the board would be entering into. And if you all decide that there aren't any, then that language could go the way of coordinators there. But I think that's a policy decision for you on the board to make.
Paxton, are you doing the chat now, Heidi?
I don't see Paxton's hand, but go ahead.
Yeah,
Oh.
Paxton has his hand up.
I need your help, Arna.
Okay, Paxton.
Thanks, I appreciate. I actually did bring this up at the tail end when we were doing our review of our final review of the document, because it had been brought up to me earlier that this was an unclarified point in the bylaws. And basically what the committee basically said is we're wrapping up the document. This is a bigger discussion that maybe the board needs to sit down and give us direction to work on this, or it was, assumed it would be something that needed further work down the road. rather than actually just tampering with this one, this document. We wanted to get this done and finalized, and then take on the next steps as the next steps. I do think this one needs more discussion and more work, but I think that's a future topic. Thank you.
Kirsten?
Thank you, Arna. I can think of numerous instances where the board would be entering into contracts that were not related to my work, other than, say, an example would be hiring a consultant to do my review. What if an ED is not present, the position is empty for a period of time, and contracts need to be signed and executed in the absence of an ED? You do not want to limit the power of the board to continue the business of the organization. There is a distinction. The board empowers me to make contracts on behalf of the organization, but the board should always retain a certain level of ability to enter into contracts. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Lisa?
Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly the same thing as Kirsten just said. The board definitely needs to retain the ability to enter into contracts. The other thing is that Paxton touched on is that, or somebody touched on, Paxton, is that the question of these sorts of changes that are outside of coming into compliance with the statutes is really outside the scope of the project that we were doing. We were charged by the board to review and update the bylaws to bring them into compliance. And so the question about, the board entering into contracts has nothing to do with that. But I agree with Kirsten.
Lawrence?
Just briefly, I was going to say that this is the value of having this work session, is that certainly a person could come in for, and look at that and say, wait a minute, it's no longer an operational board, it's a policy board. So, why does the board retain that power, and have some concern for the purview of the ED, and who better than the ED to explain why that needs to stay the way it is. So that's number one. And number two is just to what Lisa and Paxton were saying, is that the committee had a limited mandate, and it was a cleaning up and conforming with the statute. There are a lot of things. There are a lot of issues of how the fair functions and what the bylaws should contain that need to be looked at, in my opinion. But to get us across the finish line and get our mandate completed, I think this is what we did.
Okay, Heidi, that's it for hands.
Thank you. Let's move on. Qualifications, number, election, terms, votes. No major changes here. But raise your hand if you see something you want to talk about.
Oh, John Alexander's got a hand up.
Yeah, I was a little slow on the draw, but I just what I wanted to ask what LT was just referring to with regards to the mandate, but then going through and noting these additional things that might be considered. Will this committee be kind of keeping a log of those things? So when this first pass is done and your mandate is completed, you'll have maybe a set of recommendations that we might look at sometime in the future?
If the board wishes for us to do that, then yes, absolutely.
Well, I certainly think it would be a good idea if you guys are, since you're such into the deep dive here, if those are conversations and recommendations that are coming up, that even though they don't get addressed in this revision, I think a list of things that we might consider in the future would be a worthwhile thing to have, since you all put this time and energy and expertise into it.
AJ?
Yeah, I was thinking about putting it a slightly different way. My question would be, is the committee recommending these changes at this time based on trying to meet a mandate, or are they submitting these things at this time? Or do you feel like there's much more work to be done and that possibly this is being rushed to meet a mandate?
I'll take that one. We've been working on this for, I think, almost 2 years, and so I don't think we're rushing, but we do feel like we would like to get the bulk of this taken care of. And again, these are just recommendations. It's up to the board whether or not they want to take these recommendations and make these changes. But we definitely, someone should be keeping a list of the things that they want the bylaws committee to look at next. I don't feel like we're rushing.
Paxton.
There was a board motion that gave us direction to go through and bring the bylaws up to consider the ORS code changes that had just recently happened. So that's what this whole committee's been working under, is that board motion. Thank you.
Lawrence.
Yeah, I think Paxton covered it, but I was just going to say, to put it clearly, the committee works at the direction and at the pleasure of the board.
I'm just going to insert myself here for a second. What I found, I've been the liaison to the committee, since October. So, been with them just maybe 6 months. And what I found is that they do incredible work, but the things that are coming up now that we're talking about are policy issues, which, the committee can't really make decisions on because the board has to. So, they can make recommendations to the board. All of this is a recommendation to the board, all the changes in the bylaws, but a lot of this stuff is little, language changes and cleaning up the language and stuff. And, that's pretty easy in terms of, recommendations, but, policy stuff needs to come from the board. And so, having the committee, give us a list of things that they think we should look at is great. And then the board, needs to think about the policy parts of that so that the committee can work. Okay, Heidi, back to you.
Thank you.
Well, I actually just put my hand up one more time. So
Go ahead.
I would
see it.
Yeah, no worries. So I think that this is great. And I think that we should not delay this and the committee's job at hand based on that motion, because there's other things that need to be done. Let's get this over the finish line. It'd be great to see things over the finish line, but I would like to see, as a result of this, any recommendations of the committee that are general based as to exactly what you just said, Arna. So I don't want to keep them from doing that, but I don't want that to keep this from getting done.
I'm sure the committee would be happy if we could just get through this whole part, so that we could approve this, and they can at least be done with this part.
I agree.
Okay, AJ.
The part the slight concern I have is, as we're going through these recommendations, things are coming up that I felt like we just were told we could use some more guidance on these things. So my question is not about, future policy necessarily, but as we're going through these documents here, there's some questions that are coming up that we were like, well, maybe we should keep a note of that. And so my concern is, are we pushing this version or these recommendations too fast? Because if there's questions still within these recommendations that we can spend more time on, then, are we going to, as the board going to be, is the board going to be passing all of these recommendations, or are we going to go through it like tonight, where it's going to be one thing at a time? How do you plan on bringing this to the board, as a document, as a one full recommendation of all of these changes we're seeing tonight, or as individual parts?
Lisa.
Yeah, so the committee has been elbow deep in this for over 2 years, actually, Arna. And I don't think that we're rushing this at all. I think that we have been doing a really good job at being sticking to our mandate and being methodical and systematic and going through and dealing with the things that were in our charge. I would love, I'm taking notes from tonight, and I like the idea of maybe the committee making some kind of recommendation to the board about, hey, these things came up at the work session. Maybe the board ought to think about these things. Maybe we could write up a report when we're done with this project and see what the board wants to do with that report. If they want to give us another charge or take some time to sit and marinate with things. I don't know, but yeah, I think the committee would be really happy to complete this project. We definitely don't want to push it through and rush it through. We want everyone to feel good about it. And I think we'd be happy to do some more work for the board after this.
Grumpy.
You've been looking at this, or the committee's been looking at this for 2 years. It's time to get it at least close to being done, in my opinion. And how it's presented to the board is set out somewhat, I'm sure, in the current bylaws as to how you amend the bylaws. So whether you can do it by a group and everybody agree, or individual sections that have to be gone over like it is now. And frankly, the way it's been presented now is really good. All those different positions and all the changes, even with the spelling errors. It's time to go forward. And the bylaws as they are currently now tell you how they need to be amended and what the notice is and how you can discuss it at the board meeting to amend.
John Alexander.
I think that what Lisa just suggested is fantastic. I agree with Grumpy. I think this should get done because you guys have done a great job not to rush it. That's not what I'm trying to do. And I just want to encourage the committee, because there's other things I'm assuming that have come up while you all have been doing that, to include your additional things that you think we might look at too in that report, as well as just the things that have come up in this conversation. Because it sounded to me like LT had other ideas of things. So I just want to encourage the committee to get the job done, as they've done a fantastic job doing, and they're doing it. I hope we can pass this. It would be great, since we're having this work session, if we could pass it in one fell swoop, given we're going to get another look at this. But I really want to hear from the committee about those other things that they didn't feel like fell within their mandate. Not that we need to wait to get this passed to address those things. Thanks.
Okay, Heidi, back to you.
Okay. No major changes in qualifications, number, elections, terms, votes. I'm sure someone will raise their hand if they want to comment on those. We do have some more substantial changes later. And we're at about 8:15 now. Again, no major changes to the removal of directors, except for the affirmative vote piece.
Which, if I may comment, is really just a linguistic change to conform with the statute.
This is the part that says a director may be removed from office with or without cause only by a vote of the membership at a special meeting called for the purpose of.
There we go.
This is about Sandra's question from earlier.
Yeah, there I go.
And wasn't that because of the ORS statute change? That it had to be its own meeting?
I think maybe so, and I don't know if it was a change in the statute so much as maybe Stephen has an answer to that. I'll shut up.
Okay.
I think I have an answer because I've had multiple discussions with our attorney about this. And what I was told is that it does not need to be the only item on the agenda at the meeting, but the meeting needs to be called specifically for the purpose of the removal. And that's why we couldn't just do it at a regular meeting. So that's about as clear as I got, but I was told that multiple times by the attorney.
Sandra, we skipped over you.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I wanted to hear what Stephen had to say anyway on that because, interesting. If that was the definitive, in reading the special, I just wonder if having it on the agenda, it's a meeting. So does that mean that it doesn't mean that it's the only thing that can be covered at that meeting? So.
Correct. The problem is that if at our annual election, we have another specific purpose for that meeting. So we're trying to combine two singular purposes that need to be separated into one meeting, and that's what the problem is. But we could have a removal action meeting and have other items on the agenda besides that, but just not our regular election besides that. And this is a recent change in the statute, which is why in the past we've been able to do removals during the annual election.
Well, it was my understanding that the new ORS laws that came through weren't very definitive in how it was actually to be implemented, and there wasn't very much guidance on that. So people are kind of making it up as they go, which is how you do these things. So
I was going by the guidance of our attorney, which is all I could go by.
I know, but even our attorneys said that there wasn't much guidance on how to implement, and we were like stuck in how to implement. So that was the reading that we used there. But okay, well, I'm not gonna belabor this. I don't mean to do that, but it would. I wonder as we go, if it's in here, then it's a bylaw thing and it has to be in here. Okay, I'm just thinking out loud now. Okay, I'm just gonna let it go there then.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, Stephen and I talked about this a little bit, and we wondered if we could have two meetings in one day, one special meeting.
That was my plan if this ever came up again, is that I would call a meeting at 6:30 for a removal and then a meeting for a general election at 7.
Uh-huh.
But of course,
The timing wasn't right for this one, but it could be in the future.
Yeah.
And hopefully we don't have to deal with this very often.
Right. Yes, of course. Okay.
It took 30. You spent 30 years and did it once, and so
Yeah.
I've got I've done it once, so now we got 30 years to go.
I guess that it has to be happen in your first year being the membership
Yeah.
secretary. Okay, so vacancies, committees. Again, no substantial changes here. But if you see something or made a note of something, I think we're ready to move on to Article 8, which is about meetings. I'd like to know what people think of the emergency meetings.
I like it. I think it's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you really fixed that one.
I have a hand.
Oh, go ahead, LT.
I was just going to say, that the committee labored over this. I think put a lot of thought into what trying to imagine circumstances, and we also specifically reached out to who we thought would be the persons most likely to have a grasp of what that would look like on the ground, and particularly that what kind of notice was required. And so we specifically reached out to bums. We thought the people most likely during the course of the event to know what kind of notice, for example, would be useful. We got some response, I think.
And are you done, Lawrence? AJ's got his hand up.
It was just a general question as we were transitioning into this article, and that is, did the committee ever consult with a consultant regarding looking at the changes that that we see here, or the recommendations with an equity lens? And I know that was something that we talked about earlier on a couple of years ago when this was just coming up, is really to put a lens, a DEI lens, and especially on our bylaws as we were updating them. And so my question is, was there any movement in that direction? Were there any consultants hired or spoken with during this to look at the changes being made, or recommend changes based on a DEI lens?
I can speak to that. We did. We specifically, well, we didn't reach out to a consultant because we would have needed to get permission to enter into that kind of contract. But we did specifically discuss looking at the bylaws through an equity lens. And we looked at some different things. We looked at the DEI consultants reports. We looked at Mary Miller's report to the board. And I believe that a couple of our committee members also looked at other organizations and what sort of things that they might have included in their bylaws. And so yes, we did do that. We did make that consideration.
Are we specifically a DEI lens? I don't know if I heard the answer to that.
Yes, specifically a DEI lens.
Can you be more specific about that? A little bit. I mean, because I heard you say something about other organizations and what they're doing. I heard you say something about it wasn't really clear how the DEI lens, where you got that you didn't see consultants, but you sought out other organizations. Like, can you be a little bit more specific or clear about that? Of how it how does it meet the DEI lens?
We looked at the report and recommendations from the DEI consultants that the fair hired to see if there was anything applicable to the bylaws. We looked through the NAO recommendations as well to see if there was anything applicable there. A couple of committee members looked toward some other organizations that they're involved with and looked at those bylaws to see what sort of any sort of, I think it was it Anne and Diane maybe who were reaching out? So yeah, that's what we did.
Is there something that you,
I was just gonna say the consultants, the board hasn't really even discussed the consultant report that we paid for. So I'm curious about how those recommendations were taken when the board has not even received or discussed those recommendations in any important way. And then my follow-up question would be, like, were there any specific recommendations that are in this version right here that were affected by looking at with a DEI lens? Was there anything changed or any recommendations that are in this version thought about in differently based on that knowledge?
AJ, is there something that you were hoping to see in the bylaws?
No, I'm just trying to get a clear version. Like, it's not really clear to me that a DEI lens was used. And so I'm trying to hammer it down. Based on what you said, it's still not clear to me that that is a DEI lens. And so we were really specific a couple years ago when we were talking about this, and I was a part of the diversity committee, about the importance of this document having, especially now that we were going to look back on it, a real DEI lens. And so what I've heard tonight so far, I'm not seeing that yet. So I'm trying to grasp where specifically was it affected by a DEI lens.
The only place that I could personally see where the DEI lens could possibly have an effect on bylaws and the kinds of things that a bylaws cover was in the purpose here. And changing the purpose, I think, also is a bigger discussion than was part of what the committee should do. I'm just not sure. And maybe it's just my lack of knowledge, but I'm just not sure how that DEI lens would affect the legal pieces of the bylaws in anywhere except for the purpose. And it was that area that we were looking at in other organizations.
Mm-hmm.
I can see some other places. One of the things we were talking about just now was we're talking about meetings and things like that, and how membership meetings happen when you're a marginalized person in a mostly white-bodied organization. It may have an effect on you, the way meetings are held, and things like the purpose. Those are a little bit more maybe important to marginalized people who may be attending this event or participating in this organization. And I'm just, it is a really big deal. We can push through this and go fast and not have a moment that has to deal with diversity, equity, inclusion. But I think it's really important that we slow this process down and really think, did we do what we told people we were going to do? I think it's important that if we're going to say that we looked at this with the DEI lens, we better have a better answer, I think, of how we did that.
So I think this comes back to the not being in the board, the charge that the board gave us. even though we did take a look at that, that wasn't the charge that we were tasked with. And I think that that's a really good point, and maybe that is something that could be included in our report to the board of things to take a look at in the future once this particular board charge has been carried out.
Thank you.
Heidi, you're muted.
It just told me that. Am I still sharing?
No.
Okay.
You want to come back to sharing?
Yes, but I think I lost my place in the document.
While you did that, I just want to thank AJ for bringing that up. I think that was an important point.
Were we still on Article 8? Or were we on 7?
I think we were on 8.
Thank you. The board meetings. Okay. Again, I remember we were about here, emergency meetings we talked about. And so we're getting into conflict of interest, got moved farther down. Article 9 is officers. I guess, again, I'm curious if people are, if the board is supportive of this change in the recording and membership secretaries.
I
To
actually had
kind
a
of-
hand up as we went
Oh,
over
sorry.
the.
Yeah.
Yeah, no worries. I'm happy to revisit that conflict of interest statement when we get down to the section where it's appropriate, but I do have a question about that. That when we get down there to the new
Okay.
or to the other section 10, Article 10, excuse me.
And then Lisa has her hand up for John Silvermoon.
Yes, so he had a comment about officers. He says, language is added to the duties of the membership secretary to be a member of the elections committee to ensure fair and accurate elections at annual and special membership meetings. If we are going to reference the elections committee here, then earlier in the bylaws, we should establish one as a standing committee rather than simply stating that the board may establish one. Also, it is not clear by this language if the membership secretary has the authority to make election-related decisions on their own, or if they are just a member of the committee that makes those decisions. He had a little bit more to say about that and just said that he thinks that we need to have clear language in the bylaws on that.
And I think that was related to the removal petition.
Yeah,
Mhm.
but he specifically put it under the heading of officers.
Mm-hmm.
And then he had a comment about the conflict of interest as well. So
Okay,
we'll wait till we get to that.
so I'm not the
Sandra? Oh, yeah. Sandra?
if you're speaking, Sandra, we can't hear you.
Okay, there we go. I have to unmute in a different place. Yeah, I wonder why the asking them to join that committee has to be in the bylaws. I think that that is, certainly something that that secretary should do. But I do think it does kind of complicate things. I mean, what, you know, what does that do to the standing of the committee? I think that John has a point there with some of that. But I don't know that it needs to be in the bylaws. You know, that's again, sort of an implementation. I think that the committees recommend policy. So anyway, what was your thinking on actually putting that in the bylaws, that they should join, they should actually chair that committee, I guess, or be on it at least?
Well,
Why is it in the bylaws?
we put it in there so that the board doesn't have to approve a committee member. Another committee member anytime there's a new membership secretary. The way it worked for me was I got on the election committee because I was just kind of doing the membership piece as a volunteer, and then it was later during Leslie's tenure that I was officially made a secretary. And so I was already on the election committee, but then when Stephen came on, it would require him to request to be on the election committee when the election committee can't do their job without having the membership secretary on the committee. So it just made sense to me anyway, to have that be an automatic part of the membership secretary's responsibilities. And maybe Stephen has a comment about that as well. And I see AJ has his hand up.
Yeah, I kind of agree with John on this one as well. I think it, and I don't think it's too much for the board to appoint that, you know, our membership secretary to the committee. I mean, for every reason that John and Sandra just said, it just doesn't seem like it's needed in the bylaws.
Well, the board has a lot of work to do, so I guess in some ways I was just trying to avoid more things for the board to do. And I think John's point was more that the election committee, it says the board may appoint an election committee. Well, the board did appoint and has appointed an election committee, and I kind of agree with John's comment that it should just be a standing committee. And it would make more sense because who else is going to run the elections? It can't be just one person or just the secretary. So put that in our notes that maybe we should change that line about the election committee. And I see that Stephen did raise his hand. Stephen?
I'll just say that I actually asked the board to make this change last year because I wasn't on the election committee. And I discussed it with Heidi, other members of the committee, and we thought, instead of asking to appoint me to the election committee, why don't we just automatically make the membership secretary part of the committee? It seemed to make sense to me that the membership secretary needs to be on the committee in order for the committee to do its work and for the membership secretary to do their work. But personally, first of all, if you'll have me, I plan on being the membership secretary for a while. So this probably isn't going to not going to come up again for quite a while. But you know, I guess it's fairly easy to just appoint the membership secretary as a member of the committee if they're not already a member of the committee. But again, this kind of just makes it automatic. It's just one less bit of housekeeping that the board needs to do, and they can worry about more important things, was my thinking. But I'm fine with it either way. Thanks.
And Alexander?
Yeah, thank you. I do like the idea of that being a standing committee. I see why we would put that in here as a role of the secretary. One of the things I think we need to keep track of while we go through here is what policies do we need in place that don't need to be in the bylaws, but actually need to be policies. And that's going to be a recommendation I'm going to make when we come back to the conflict of interest one. Thanks.
Thank you.
We got Lawrence.
Yeah, we didn't think about standing committees, but it seems pretty obvious now. Elections committee, budget committee clearly needs to be a standing committee. And I think the interface between officers and committees is pretty obvious in both those contexts. The membership secretary shall be a member of the elections committee in the same way that once, and I think we really need to do this in our next iteration, the treasurer shall be a member of the budget committee. I mean, these are kind of apparent things, and once you think about them, I'm puzzled that this one slipped by me though. This ensure fair and accurate elections and annual and special membership meetings. Well, I should hope so. But it puzzles me that we need to spell that out. So that language just, it's like it's a little kind of Orwellian in a way. I mean, it's like, if we have to say it, is there really a problem? But standing committees, I would, and again, membership secretary shall be a member, and I think we need to get back to this whole idea and set up some standing committees because, they already exist in fact, and I think it makes sense to codify them, but that's it.
Sandra?
Yeah, I think I'll take my hand down. Sorry.
That's all the list. Hi, Heidi. That's,
Okay.
I had one last
oh,
moment thing. Could there be could there be some confusion because there were two secretary positions, and that may be, right now one person is doing both those positions, but there may be there was a time before where there were two different secretaries. And so sparsing that out and making that clear, which one, obviously, yeah. So I'm just throwing that out there, that there used to be two secretaries.
Well, that's what I'm saying. What I was saying, AJ, is that our practice has been to have two secretaries for a long time. And now we're just putting it in the bylaws. It used to be just one secretary in the bylaws, that two people did the job. And it said two people could do the job, but now we're just kind of designating that one person is the recording secretary and the other is the membership secretary. When we have two people, because I think it's going to be really hard to ever get anybody to be the one secretary and do both of those jobs. Does that clarify that a little bit, AJ?
Sure does. Yeah, I was just trying to figure out the clarity between, real quick. So we were just talking about appointing, whether we want to appoint the membership secretary to, the elections committee, or whether we should just put it in the bylaws. And then my question would be, my question was more about, there are some duties right now based on the duties of both of the secretaries. We may want to look at that, because it may be that both secretaries, based on whatever duties they're required to do at that time, need to be on that committee. I don't know that answer at this point, but really finding out what are the definitions of the two positions, and is there always going to be one of those positions that is the member to the elections committee, or all those who are blended? Yeah.
I like that. Because we were a shared position, I always told the recording secretary, and you have to help on the election committee because it was part of their job. And so I liked that as the secretary, that job that we were sharing. And so I kind of like that, having the recording secretary on, the idea of having them on the election committee as well. Is that kind of what you were saying, AJ?
Exactly, because that's, it makes sense to me that both of them, and so if the language could be around the secretary position as either one or two. I don't know how that wording works, but
well, you can see here that we are trying to divide it. And in the event that one of the secretary positions is not filled, the duties of that secretary shall be performed by one secretary or their designee.
Yeah, and most likely that's
Kind
going
of
to fall
that.
to the other secretary. So we
Exactly.
might as well have both of them on the committee.
I would also like to add that when you retire as the recording secretary, you have to stay on the election committee. Because that's kind of been our current practice, but some of them have slid away from us. So, sorry. Let's go ahead and move on. So LT, it does say to supervise and effectuate the annual budget, which they can't really do without being on the budget committee. But it wouldn't hurt to add that, possibly.
I think it makes sense, but again, I would go with at some point, you know, not tonight, not in this iteration, but I think that should be on the list somewhere in the committee section to set up a set of standing committees and then such other committees as the board shall from time to time establish.
Well, and maybe this is a good time to point out that we're not expecting that these are going to get passed even at the board meeting after next, because we'll take some of the suggestions and comments and make some changes, send it to the lawyer again. So it's still not going to be brought before the board to be passed for probably more than 2 months, is what I'm guessing. So, you know, we can decide what we want to do with the charter members and offer that.
Can I just say
Oops.
I appreciate you saying that, Heidi, because I was under the impression that this was coming up soon. That's why I was really having a reaction to some of the things that were said earlier. So thank you for clarifying what you just said. That makes me feel a lot better about being anxious about how we're going about this tonight.
Sometimes I'm a little slow, but I think that was kind of percolating in my head and I was realizing that was maybe part of the concern. So I hope that does help. But for sure, it's going to have to go to the lawyer again if we make any changes. Well, it has to go to the lawyer again because we took her advice and made these changes that are in the third column here. So it's got to go to the lawyer again anyway. So this is not, we really aren't rushing. Please.
In any event, the process can only go as fast as the board or the 2/3 of the board that votes for it says, subject to the limitation in the amendment section that there has to be announcement at the previous meeting. So the board is in control of this, you know, not the committee.
Exactly. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and because we are getting closer to 9 o'clock, if you have something in here that you want to discuss, you can always emails. But let's get to the transactions one, Article 10. And so let me move this. You can see the notes, and so I can see the notes. So this first part about no director or officer of the OCF shall be interested directly or indirectly in any transaction with the OCF unless, and so this is to track ORS 65.361 regarding director conflicts of interest, which is framed in terms of transaction rather than contracts. And I think that that was part of John Silvermoon's comment, was that he something about contracts. And unless the transaction is approved or ratified by the affirmative vote of 2/3 of the directors who have no direct or indirect interest in the transaction may not be approved or ratified under this section by a single director. And B, the material facts of the transaction and the nature of the director or officer's interest have been fully disclosed or are known to the board prior to consideration of the matter. Are there hands on this?
Yeah, John Alexander has his hand up.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, so there was a bit of confusion a while back around some of this and the conflict of interest policy and then the consequences of a conflict of interest policy. And I had some really good conversations with board members and members of this committee about that was clarifying. And the reason I put my hand up before where we erased that bit about the conflict of interest. I've seen independent conflict of interest policies that were not part of the bylaws that addressed when and how a board member should and the processes for which disclosing potential conflicts of interest. And so I just want to put on that I haven't seen, and if I missed it, hopefully I'm being a little more less careless than I was when I missed that clause earlier today. But that we put on the list of policies that we need, if we don't already have one, a conflict of interest policy, which would then invoke this. So this is really well done. I like the way this is. I think it clarifies some of the issues that came up at earlier board meetings. However, I think it calls for, if we're going to remove that conflict of interest statement, which I don't understand why it came where it came in the bylaws anyway, that the board should consider the development of a conflict of interest policy that's standalone.
Lisa?
Yeah, so I took note of that, John, about a standalone conflict of interest policy. You probably know that the ORS statutes require us to address conflict of interest. So that's why that's in the bylaws the way it is. For John S., I won't read the whole thing, but basically he thinks that we should keep the contract language in there. And also he says how the FAIR defines a conflict of interest can be more expansive than as defined by state law, which is true. State law is the minimum required. So he thinks that the changes that are being proposed dilute the current standard being used by the FAIR, and he's not in favor of that.
Lawrence.
Oh, thanks. As I understand the words, every contract is a transaction, but not every transaction is a contract. So by saying transaction, the scope of the requirement is actually broadened. And I think that was I believe the intent of the attorney's advice was not to limit the rule regarding the interests of officers and directors to contracts, but to expand it to any kind of transaction that might be engaged in by the OCF. So in that sense, I would disagree with John on that point, because what we're suggesting is a broader and more inclusive standard.
John Alexander.
Yeah, Lawrence, I agree. I think that and the language here, clearly you guys were looking at the statute because it's pretty verbatim. So I think we hopefully could address John's issue in a standalone conflict of interest policy that would then invoke this article if there was a conflict of interest disclosed on the table. So nice job here, I think.
Sandra.
Yeah, I think that this is well written. And I think we have to remember that the bylaws are supposed to be general concepts. They're not a how-to, and that you have rules and regulations for us policy that it is the how-to. And I think that's what John Alexander is asking for, a policy of how to implement what's required in the bylaws. And because you don't want the bylaws to be so prescriptive, because it may be different, you know, you don't want to have to change these that often. These should be fairly standard, you know, fairly long-term. So I think this is a good way to go.
Lawrence.
I just wanted to encapsulate and amplify what Sandra just said. The bylaws are like a constitution. They're not like our statutes. And so I think that's what Sandra is saying, is that they need to be the broad framework, just like a state or federal constitution.
Okay, Heidi, back to you.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you to our lawyer who gave us most of this language.
Thank you, guys. You did such a good job of laying this all out. I really appreciate it. It was easy to follow and well done. Thank you.
Well, I will thank Lisa and Kimmo for that because this is without the third column. This is kind of how they laid it out for us, for the committee, at the beginning of our work. And it really, has been helpful. And that's why we carried it through to this meeting, because it worked for us to see how they were and see how the changes were happening. And so just to finish up this Article 10,
Oh, thought we were done.
not quite. No, there's another page.
Oh, there we
So the
go.
part about relatives here was just revised to track the ORS again, except including officers. And then but the relevant language in this box was moved to section 1 so that the approval process was all in one place, which totally makes sense. And again, you know, this document, it should be available to you in your board packets. And remember that this is how it would read at the end in this last column, if the board chooses to pass this after the changes and after it sees the lawyer again. And so Article 11 is an amendment, and it was revised to comply with the ORS, which, you know, is just about notice of intent to amend was given to all directors in accordance with Article 8, Section 3, together with a copy or summary of the amendment or statement of the general nature of the amendment. And except for section notwithstanding, oh, don't, I'm sorry. I'm getting tired. And then just a reminder that Article 5, Section 6 about membership rights cannot be changed unless there is an affirmative vote of the membership. And so that one was not changed.
To put it simply, all that means is the members' right to vote can't be taken away except by a vote of the members.
And I guess this is reminding me too, and what we're offering here are potential changes, recommended changes. I guess we aren't really offering amendments because an amendment is a more of a, correct me if I'm wrong, Lawrence, more of a legal thing.
Give me that again. I missed it.
This was final bylaw amendment recommendations is what I named this, but I'm thinking they're not really amendments. We're offering changes to the bylaws. We're not offering official amendments.
We're as I understand it, we are proposing a set of amendments.
Okay.
And so then, of course, that has to go through the amendment process. So there's the notice requirement, and the board will do that in accordance with it, with the notice. But yeah, anytime we change anything in the bylaws, I think that by definition it's an amendment, even one word.
Except this article is titled amendment.
Right.
Why
It is. But you can amend any article, including the one including the
Okay.
one on amendments, you know. But as long as the process for amendments is followed. Yeah, I know it's a little circular, but yeah.
See how we got into wordy stuff?
So I had a
Committee
hand up.
meetings?
I put my hand up as we were glazing
Oh,
through
yes,
that last
okay.
bit. Speaking
ahead.
of definitions of amendment, is the term relative defined by law? Because that in a circuitous way came up earlier this year. Related to, or that a person who is related to, is that something that's a specific thing? So we don't need to quibble about what that means?
Well, you know, we asked about this specifically when we sent it to the lawyers, and this is what she came back with.
So then that's probably a yes.
It tracks ORS 65.
That's good enough to me, for me.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you. Okay, so I'm looking at 9:02, I think. And so we're not running too late, let me see. I'm gonna stop sharing so I can go look at the agenda. So do we have anything else about the bylaws? Questions or comments?
Well, just, I think we should let folks know what the committee plans to do next, which is to take all of this input and feedback and go through it at our next meeting. And yeah, and then it's going to go through the lawyer again, and then it'll come back to the board again.
And so we will look at the documents that Grumpy sends, so to try to figure out the charter member piece and offer a recommendation. And so meeting evaluation. For the good of the speech, let's make it really short. How about a thumbs up or thumbs down? Or a thumbs sideways?
I think it was really well run. Thank you.
I hope you all know your bylaws really well now than you did before.
I
It's
wanted
gonna
to,
be a test.
I did want to jump in to thank the committee for persisting in dragging me back into the process, to the board for appointing me. It's been the most rewarding and joyous service to the fair I've done since the last time I dipped a brush and cleanser.
And so let me just say, the reason that we were really pushing LT to come back is because when I first started on the bylaws committee, we had Russell. And so Russell, we had our meetings, our bylaw committee meetings at Russell's house. We'd have
With meals.
yes, with potlucks.
Good meal.
Make these wonderful roasted meals. And so, and also we only had to meet, maybe once or twice a year when they gave us something to do. And so we've been meeting a lot without a lawyer on the committee. And we used to have 3 or 4 lawyers on the committee. So we just started begging LT to come back because we knew the bylaws and we needed a legal mind.
We always had a
Thank you.
lawyer on the board for decades as well. That's something that's been missing maybe for 5 years or so. Not that I'm ever going to run again.
I guess the lawyers got smarter.
Well, in one more year, we're gonna have a father of a lawyer.
There you go.
I just want to report, we had 24 people on the YouTube and 22 of us, 23 of us here. So on the Zoom meeting, it was well-attended work session. Thank you all.
Yeah, way to go, committee. Thanks. It's great to see great volunteer work like this.
Sorry. We have an email address for the committee as well. If anybody wants to reach out with any questions or comments, it's bylaws@OregonCountryFair.org.
And it really does help to have comments in writing.
It does.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you,
everybody.